The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
You're very welcome along to the Sunday Papers. Joe Molloy with you this afternoon. We've a busy show, lots to discuss. Sarah O'Donovan is an All-Ireland Camogie winner with Cork and represented Dublin as well. She is with us, as is Gavin Cummiskey of the Irish Times. I'll go through the front pages just to get the ball rolling. So the Sunday Independent, they have a picture from the Connacht game last night, the sports ground at half-time. Picture of Ashling Murphy, where there was a tribute paid to her during that game. She was out for a run when it happened. She was working on her fitness for the Camogie season. Tommy Conlon, page 7 inside, which we'll come to. And then beneath that, less important, I'm sure you'll agree, Ragged United suffer at hands of Coutinho. This was the game last night where Manchester United threw away a 2-goal lead at Villa Park. Back page of the Sunday World, it's a picture of Mo Salah, who's over at the African Cup of Nations at the moment. Mo money or Mo problems. This is an interesting piece in that Ken Lawrence is saying that one of the issues Liverpool owners have with giving Mo Salah a huge jump in salary is that apparently 3 other players have clauses in their contract guaranteeing them a parity with the highest paid player at the club. These are always expensive clauses to have in your contract. So Virgil van Dijk, and then I was surprised really. Van Dijk I could see. Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, as brilliant as they are, the 2 fullbacks will be amongst top paid players at the club if Mo Salah gets the deal. Apparently that's the back page of the Sunday World. Sunday Mirror. So we have Manchester City celebrating their win against Chelsea. De Bruyne after his brilliant goal. That's the title. In the bag is the headline. And then Ralph Rage. This is Ralph Radnick, not happy at the lack of backing he's getting in the transfer market, apparently. Sunday Times then, we have Kevin De Bruyne wheeling away in celebration yesterday in the lunchtime sunshine in Manchester. League of their own is the headline. De Bruyne sends City 13 points clear as Tuchel hangs Lukaku out to dry. Wasn't impressed with his performance. Interesting story beside that, Christian Eriksen set to return to the English top flight. So Christian Eriksen wants to get back at it, thankfully, and he's 29 years of age now. He's obviously a free agent and he wants to play in the World Cup in Qatar in November. Money, no great motivation for him. He was on 200 grand a week at Inter, so he's willing and able to take a very reasonable deal, and there is interest around the Premier League, as you might imagine. Beneath that, Spurs anger over late call to postpone Derby clash. We were meant to have Arsenal against Spurs today on the show, called off. Gary Neville amongst those calling the postponement a joke, frankly. It needs to stop, is his line. Spurs say they're extremely surprised by the decision. This is the 21st top flight match called off this season. The big complaint is that Arsenal, at the time of requesting the cancellation or the postponement certainly, only had 1 positive COVID in their camp. They have a number of players at the African Cup of Nations. They have a number of injuries. None of those have anything to do with COVID. And as Spurs say, the original intention of the guidance was to deal with player availability directly affected by COVID cases. So 1 COVID case. People seem to think Arsenal are not exactly obeying the spirit of the rule here. And that's the lead on the back page of the Sun as well. A picture of Conte, sick of it. Spurs, we've been dealt with so unfairly. They're talking about their issues in Europe when they had a whole host of COVID cases and were put out of the tournament. Prem chiefs are accused of ignoring own rules. And then on the back page of the Mail on Sunday, Rafa Benitez out is their big headline. Everton act as Ida goal ensures defeat at Norwich. Rafa Benitez set to be sacked as Everton boss. The club's owners locked in an emergency board meeting last night after their 9th defeat in 13 Premier League games. 9 defeats in 13. That is a bad run. The picture was of Coutinho celebrating his goal as well. And then finally, The Observer, clear blue skies. This is the best title I will have, says Guardiola after De Bruyne's brilliance secures the win. Gav, Sarah, you're both very welcome. Sarah, we'll start with Ashling Murphy. Before we get into the pieces, I mean, I can't think for a very long time of a murder which has so united the country in grief, anger, sadness, discussion. It's all anybody I meet is talking about at the moment, I have to say.
Yes, I'm finding it incredibly difficult this week as a sportswoman in this country to read about the murder, and I suppose as a woman in this country to firstly to to read about her murder. But what struck me this morning thinking about it was Ashling is the second woman from a sports team in this country to be murdered this year. Jenny Poole from Erin's Isle, a club in Dublin, was murdered last April. So I imagine for her teammates, this brings everything back. And it's incredible to think that this story has happened again so quickly, having been front and centre last April, that male violence is a reason why one of our teammates is not turning up to training, you know.
What has struck you about the conversation subsequent to the awful incident?
That feeling of helplessness, you know, on a pitch. We're constantly supporting our teammates and looking after our teammates and encouraging and motivating each other. And I suppose there's a sense of isolation now because nobody was able to help her. And I don't know, from the point of view of somebody involved in a team, you're always trying to help your teammate. And I think for them and for everyone, it's that sense that nobody could help her then on that day.
Gav, your overall reflections on the past couple of days?
I've teenage nieces, so I don't want to talk to them about it. I don't think we should have to talk to them. They like to go for runs in the evening, you know, in winter evenings. So that's been really difficult. Just, again, a helplessness that you feel like you shouldn't frighten them, you know. Just looking at the writings in the Sunday papers, and I'm including myself in this, like, it's overwhelming male commentators talking about this, and none of them are in a position to talk about it. I thought David Walsh had enough common sense to quote as many female experts in, there's no field, but, you know, in his piece. And I thought that would get me to advise to go read his piece itself. But sports people can't ignore it. I thought Lisa Fallon did a courageous, I know, sorry, it's not the Sunday papers, but I know Lisa Fallon did a courageous column on Friday in the Irish Times about it. And I direct people towards that. But otherwise, I just get in behind what Sarah said there, that helplessness does still linger in the mind.
Mm. The vigils have been very powerful, Sarah, I would say as well.
There's, I suppose, a place to go and consider, you know, your grief, and, you know, I suppose it's an outlet for people, because sitting in your car crying, which I have done a couple of days this week, that's a very lonely and isolating place. Mm. So I think to be able to go to a vigil and express your emotion and feel support, that's been helpful. But it's in the weeks and months ahead, no more so for the girls in Erin's Isle in Dublin. That's when the support will be mostly needed.
What kind of conversations are you having, Sarah, with your female friends or female family members, can I ask?
I suppose it's just that sense of frustration, first and foremost. Like I read Michael Healy-Rae and suggesting that I should carry mace. You know, then should I carry a hurley? You know, when I go out for a run, should I be carrying a weapon? Because it feels nonsensical to me that I should have to go out and protect myself before I leave my front door. And I think that's what everyone feels like. It shouldn't be a case of how many layers of armour can I put on just to be in the world. And that feels very trapping. And for all of us, I think it feels like our freedom is ebbing away every day with the measures that we have to take to be in the world.
So when you go out for a run, we've heard lots of women talk about this, for instance, and David Walsh's piece focuses on just going out for a run initially, and that is the sporting component of this much wider story. When you go out for a run, are you on high alert, as so many women have discussed?
Well, I don't. I thought that running during the day would have kept me safe, so I chose to run during the day because of remote working, and it made more sense to me, but clearly that doesn't help now. I choose to run with my boyfriend now, you know, things like that. And he, I suppose prior to this, he would nearly feel that I was hysterical, because I'd be saying, listen, I'm not comfortable going down that road. Do you mind doing that route with me? And he's like, oh, sure, right, grand. And kind of rolling his eyes. But I think in the last week, he's seen how affected I've been by it. And I think even for him, he's going, God, maybe she hasn't been as hysterical as I thought she was being, because genuinely I'm just expressing a sense of fear. And I have been doing that for quite a while. This isn't new. But now it feels like even the measures that I take to run in daylight won't help, you know.
I had a terribly depressing thought I want to put it to you. And it's probably an upsetting thought, really. And I've spent a lot of the last couple of days just listening to every conversation I could and listening as much as possible, reading as much as possible. And so many of the accounts of women, when it comes to jogging or walking or just being in situations of vulnerability, are awful. And I don't have those same experiences. I don't think about my run in accordance with the time of the day, for instance, or even what route I'm going to take, ever. I've never once thought that, ever. So things like the keys between the fingers and headphones in but not on and fake phone calls going on, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think we don't live in such a horrifically dysfunctional society that there is genuine risk at every turn. However, it does seem the consequences of coming across that deranged person are so grave, even if the chances aren't especially high at every moment. The consequences are so grave that I don't know if there'll ever be a point across the decades in our lifetimes where women won't be on high alert in those situations. Again, I think and I hope the chances of something fatal happening are incredibly slim, and yet the consequences are so great. I don't know, Sarah, how at any stage, however much progress is made, you'll ever not look at that route and think, there is a chance. It might be a 1% chance, but it's such a horrific consequence. I can't take that chance. That's the most depressing thought I've had this week.
I live in a very, very quiet, I didn't realise how remote it was, part of West Cork. And while it's not remote in the sense that it's quite central, quite close to Kinsale, so not remote, the road leading around our house is about 8 kilometres and it's beautiful. But less and less I have been comfortable walking that road on my own with my headphones in, and my sister's the same. It's because of that sense of fear of the unknown and that risk, that 1% chance that somebody on that road will be there that won't treat you in the way that you should be treated. And that's why I don't walk that road on my own, you know, and that's a really sad indictment of the world that we live in, that a beautiful place, you know, in West Cork is a place of fear for me on a random Saturday or Sunday afternoon.
Gav, thoughts on that point?
Yeah, there's even, we can't do anything about the horrific, dangerous people who exist in the world, but we can do things about the peer pressure that happens where a group of lads on campus in UCD or UL, and I heard this week, that women, like a lecturer in UL and teachers and female students don't feel safe running around the campuses in Ireland. And it's not because it's not a fear of attack, it's a fear of abuse, you know, it's a fear of those little horrible things that are said when you run past and all that. And that is something we can address.
Correct, yeah.
And that is something we can come down with zero tolerance. And you put someone in jail for 2 weeks for abusing a woman who's out on a run, and it will clamp down fairly quickly, you know what I mean? Like, there's talk of zero tolerance with these kind of things. But there is little things we can do to address the whole systematic problem in society, which can be done immediately. And it's happened in other countries where you can go to jail. In Morocco about 10 years ago, it was so bad. You could go to jail for 6 months for catcalling on the street. And I think it happened to one man, but man, the whistling stopped. It didn't stop completely, but it definitely stopped for a while, you know, and it changed maybe one or two attitudes.
Yeah. And we should talk about that. And that's very important. And that's where, if I said the first thought was very depressing, maybe there's more optimism in terms of changing the overall culture. But that one
culture has changed, Joe.
Yeah, it has. But that
you see so many young women out running in my area, in everywhere.
Same, yeah.
Didn't see it before. So culture has changed.
Yeah.
One of the sexes just has to catch up.
Yeah. It's just, I suppose, that high alert point, and listening to the testimony, Sarah, and Anya Kerr was on during the week talking about how she mixes up her route. You know, again, this is just not stuff I'm thinking about. I don't not to labour this point, but I suspect it's a horrible reality that just needs to be acknowledged. I don't know if we can solve it, but it's a horrible reality that I don't know if in 10, 20, 30 years when we talk, you'll say, oh, that road now I'm totally fine with because there's 0% chance. I think that just seems to be this awful reality of being a woman.
That's precedence, isn't it? So everything that's gone before, the more and more that we read and the more and more that occurs, like, as I said, 2 female sportswomen in the last year have been murdered. And that is the reality for every ladies football and camogie team in this country this week. And we can't ignore that. So we can't forget that. And that's why it's never going to go away. That's why there's always going to be that fear.
To Gav's point about at least improving the culture. So David Walsh is talking about jogging, for instance, and safety in numbers. Daylight runs are preferable. Some women run with an alarm. Many take their phones for security, while still others inform a friend when to expect them back so that an alarm can be raised if they're not. Very few women feel they can put on their runners and just head out. There was a US Runners World magazine questionnaire, 5,000 mostly female runners last year. Survey showed 84% of the women had been harassed while running. Behaviour included catcalls, being followed, physical assault. 67% said they were sometimes concerned they'd be attacked while running, and 16% said they felt threatened and feared for their lives. There was another survey in the UK recently as well. 27% told of having been followed by someone in a car, on foot or on a bike while out running. Sometimes it's a lewd comment, other times it's silent intimidation, often it's just common or garden harassment. So what about that aspect of the culture? And Gav mentioned Orla Muldoon as well from University of Limerick, talking about even the atmosphere on a college campus. What about those lower tier offences by comparison with murder? The atmosphere for you when you're out running, what's been your experience, Sarah?
I think that on certain days you're very visible and other days you're completely invisible, and it's the days when you're not expecting it are the days that are most frustrating. So we all have goals, and we're going out to compete with ourselves, sometimes, and all of a sudden you're interrupted and you're visible to somebody for no other reason but the fact that you're a woman, and you're, as I said earlier, in the world. And it's incredibly frustrating and exhausting for me to, I suppose, engage with that, right? Because I don't want that to be my constant. I want to focus on the run. So when I come home and I'm angry about it, I want to try and forget it as quickly as I can. I don't want to bring it up. And then even when you bring it up, people go, "Gosh, don't mind that. Don't let that get to you," and there's a sense that we should move on as quickly, because if you labour in it, then you're giving them a voice, and you're giving them attention. And sure, isn't that what they wanted? So you're nearly trying to push it away to try and forget it as quickly as you can so that you can go out the next day and focus on the thing that's important to you. So it's incredibly difficult to find a balance between addressing it and calling it out for what it is and moving beyond it, not giving it attention so that they might actually stop. Because are they looking for attention or are they bored? I don't know which. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what the intention is.
So, Sarah, I know for a fact that women in my family don't tell me about incidents that are not major when they go on runs, because my reaction will be anger. Yeah. And I'll be like, oh, we have to go do something about this and make a scene. And that's my initial, and they just don't want to be dealing with me. They don't want to be dealing with that and then coming home and having to deal with Mr. Angry, like going, that's a disgrace, let's go deal with it. Because I won't be able to deal with it in the right way.
No.
Well, like if I go for a run, my January night runs, I can do the exact opposite. I can put the music in, I can zone out, and it's literally therapy because I know I'm safe. And I can go up the mountains, the foothills of the Dublin mountains, and I can run around and not a bother on me. And I can stop, and someone comes towards me and I don't get frightened at all. I'm fine. A group of lads come towards me, not a bother on me. Like not even a tiny bit of fear that you might have had when you were younger. It just doesn't exist in my psyche. So it's very hard. It's still even very hard. And you see it in the pieces we've written today. I thought like Anya Kerr was brilliant this week in that News Talk segment. Yeah. I thought she really just laid it out in a lot of kind of a really logical, sensible terms. Yeah, it has to spill into sport because we're talking about running, we're talking about what's the basic premise of all sport, and it's I say a lot of men are kind of being their eyes are being opened a little bit this week, which is I suppose a good thing,
And would it be very routine, Sarah, Not that if it happens once, by the way, it's in any way okay, but I mean, across a month, if you did a handful of jogs, would you anticipate a wolf whistle, certainly in a given month, or catcall, or beeping, or someone running too close to you? Is all of that stuff fairly commonplace, or less so in your experience?
Yeah, it's pretty commonplace. And look, I'm not going to, I suppose, objectify women by saying that it'll happen to some more than others. It'll be both positive and negative. You know, it can be derogatory, and it can be considered, you know, confidence boosting.
Yeah.
You know, some would suggest that, oh, isn't it nice that he's telling you that you look well? And I'm saying, well, I don't want to know his opinion of me. I don't want him to objectify me. I don't want him to have an opinion. So it's incredibly frustrating, because it could happen. It could happen on a particular road, because, you know, it's a busy road, or it might just be one man standing next to a wall down a country road. It has no sense or meaning to when or where it happens. It depends on the man sitting on the wall. Do you know?
Yeah. And I would presume the horrible contamination for you is you spot the group of lads, or just the man sitting on the wall from 50 or 100 yards away, and you spend the 100 yards wondering, is it going to happen, is it not going to happen? And say it doesn't happen. That's been your, that's been your lot for the 100 yards. And then, there's plenty of men every 100 yards.
That's the energy that I have to exude, worrying about what's coming. I would much rather put my energy into my run, but I'm running and nearly bracing myself for either something positive or negative. And if it's positive, it's still interrupting my day. You know what I mean? It's not something that I want, or I didn't ask for it. So, I'm not turning to the wall, objectifying the man sitting on the wall. He doesn't come into my frame of vision. So I don't understand why I should be in his frame of vision.
What's really chilling is that there hasn't been a generational change. Like, it was normal for me, as I'm in my 40s, like in my teenage years, it was normal for us to make comments when we were in groups. And it was, that was what we were encouraged to do as groups of lads. And that was kind of drilled out of us a lot as we kind of grew up. But it doesn't seem to have been drilled out of the current generation, teenagers and people in their 20s, that it's still kind of it's still what they do, It's like the group dynamics still leads that way, We talk about men standing up, like, you don't see it. You don't see it in elite sport anyway. Very rare. Like Seamus Coleman is like this beacon on his own in Irish sport. He's actually stood up for his opposite numbers, and when it comes to the equal pay thing for Irish footballers. But I can't think of anyone off the top of my head in elite rugby, GAA. I'd be there to be corrected, like, who's really kind of taken a stance for these are for basic things for their wives, their daughters, their sisters,
I would say that the new GPA committee is very strong at the moment. Tom Parsons, Donal Cusack, they have been incredibly helpful to the current GPA, women's GPA, in terms of navigating how this year's funding will be utilised and addressed. So they're, I suppose, following in Seamus Coleman's footsteps. And if Seamus was the first, they certainly had a brilliant beacon to follow. And they're taking, his lead, which suggests that if more men stood up and called out this behaviour, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation so frequently.
Yeah. Well, Gav, I absolutely take your point on sentencing. But a few times during the week, what resonated with me was the analogy to drink driving and how it genuinely has become socially unacceptable, and you would be shunned if you were a regular or even a one-time drink driver. It would just not go down well. And we need to get to a point where the teenager or the 20-something-year-old or the 50-something-year-old behaves in a harassing way and turns around to his mates and is shunned. Doesn't get the laugh, gets the, no, that's not a line we cross treatment. And that has to become the norm. And look, you see, there's so many aspects to this, and Malachy Clerkin used that great analogy of it's like wallpaper and you put down one bubble, another one bubbles up. We're talking about strangers interacting with women here, and yet, God, isn't the headline figure that we've all seen from Women's Aid that 87% of the murders happen courtesy of people women know, partners, I would think, in the main. And we have this whole cohort of men who can't express themselves, I think, who resort to their fists, who weren't brought up the right way, who weren't educated, who probably have a latent misogyny. It was, news to me, Nolan Blackwell, the Rape Crisis Centre CEO, said in the Late Late Show, wasn't a crime for a man to rape his wife in this country 50 years ago. That's the blink of an eye in the evolution of a state. So that misogyny just doesn't evaporate, and there are just so many angry men as well. Young and old, there are angry men out there. And I would suspect plenty of partners in the home have been victims of displaced anger. And it's unleashed behind closed doors. And before we talk about consent and sexual violence, and I don't know, I think your point about generations, Gav, is really interesting. I'm thinking a lot about my own upbringing this week. So I'm 36. All boys school, primary, all boys school, secondary, no sisters, 2 brothers. All my mates, generally male growing up. All the football teams I played on, male. That's the atmosphere. And you think back and it was like real lad culture. The magazines. You think of Soccer AM, which was on when we were this was the most popular show on Saturday. And there was the Soccerette section where I think only with a tiny bit of irony. There was some irony, but not much, where the good-looking girl wore her jersey, tied it up, and walked up and down, and the lads all just lost their minds. You know what I mean? This was kind of the culture. And I think my parents set a brilliant example, by the way. So, I want to be very careful here. And from their generation took a quantum leap. From 50s, 60s, Ireland took a quantum leap. But I would say the conversations amounted to awkwardly giving you a sex ed book. And the sex education in secondary school I had, and conversations to a group of 36 men in a class. How do we treat women? How do we approach relationships? How do we approach... It was none of that. It was if you don't wear a condom, you're going to catch some weird stuff. That was genuinely, that was it over half an hour. And I think our parents' generation did the best we could. I think we were raised in a certain environment, but I think the takeaway has to be for the next generation, fathers, we're going to have to talk to our sons about consent. We're going to have to talk about pornography. The world of Wi-Fi was not available to us, thank God. We're going to talk about sexism, language used around women, all the key tenets of being a good partner. And I think that's, it's the next generation just have to become such a focus, as well as, working on the current situation. But for us, Gav, people our age, men our age in particular, what we do with our sons now, it's going to be awkward. They're going to be painful conversations. Probably have to be done in the car so we don't even look at each other at times.
Yeah, but there's only just so much you can do, and eventually you're going to stick at their teenagers. And if you send them to this big all boys schools that exist in this country, that are still dominant, the influence of the lads in the classroom is going to have more influence than their dad. After a while, it'll just. So that's where it is.
But if all the dads are having conversations with all the boys, look, there's going to be issues. Of course there are. But in terms of another leap forward, another change, you got to hope all the dads are having all the conversations. That's what we have to strive for. But I take your point. We have to deal in realities here as well.
Well, to that point, I was at the Ireland All Blacks game and I was tipping down after Ireland's big win, and 2 guys were stood in front of me and they were Leinster based because of their accents, and one guy says to the other guy, listen, we're going to head to the pub there. I'll put it into the WhatsApp group, our location. And your man says, listen, I left that group. Didn't like the tone of it. Sorry, lad. And he said, oh, right. Okay, I'll send you a WhatsApp on your other number. No bother. And I just thought, that's a conversation that happened 3 months ago. And that's still vivid in my head, that the guy, called out the lad culture in that group and said, sorry, lad, I left that group. Didn't like the tone of it. And I went, wow. So that's the kind of conversation that needs to be had, repeatedly in these groups, where these guys say, lads, the culture in this group is sick. It's not for me. I'm out.
But there's even in the WhatsApp groups that aren't like that, all the male WhatsApp groups that I'm in, there's no positive reinforcement of women's sport, or there's never once been a comment about anything I've ever written about the female game in 20 years in journalism where someone's going to come around going, right. No, that's it, not even interesting, because nobody wants to go near it. So I'm talking about the good people out there, the good fathers, the good brothers, the good partners. They don't touch it with a 10-foot pole, because you leave yourself open to ridicule. you know.
Yeah.
And also everyone knows they're not perfect, you know, so they know
that is the other thing, you know. You can feel like a hypocrite, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that's another element of it. But I guess I don't have an answer at all. But education in schools, like my education in a primary school, a mixed primary school, was very important for when I went into a single-sex, male, big private school. I had the foundation of sisters in the kitchen and I had the foundation of primary school, but it was nowhere near enough to stop me from the influence as a 12, 13, 14-year-old to the popular lads, you know. And, well, the funniest joke is always the filthiest joke, you know. So, like, that just overwhelms you. So, you get to the nub of that and we're taking a huge leap as a society.
Yeah. I thought Tommy Conlon wrote a very thought-provoking piece. I don't know if you thought it was good, bad and different. I found it very interesting and probably read it again at some stage afterwards. Like he starts by he doesn't take David Walsh's tack, as you mentioned. It's not quoting women, Gav. I'd say it's more the male perspective. So he starts by quoting Dr. Yuval Noah Harari, very well known author at this stage and professor, and just outlines the extent to which violence is an aspect of humanity, and that very much lies with men down the years, and talks about how there's an inherent cruelty, you know, going back over hundreds of thousand years. Tolerance is not a sapiens trademark. In modern times, a small difference of skin, colour, dialect, religion has been enough to prompt one group of sapiens to set about exterminating another group. Harari advances his theories as to why we are a cruel and dangerous species, but whatever the original reasons, we cannot doubt that we are. The scandalous history of the 20th century alone confirms that much. And he says the vast canvas of violence stretching back over millennia has been painted overwhelmingly by the male of the species. So he goes on to talk about attitudes to women, and societal attempts to civilise these instincts are essentially an environmental response to a biological syndrome, an external bandage on a profoundly interior sickness and therefore painfully limited solution. Current estimate, 4 billion males on the planet, even allowing for infants, boys, elders, and the great majority of peaceful men. That number still makes for a lot of potential and actual violence. Says state legislation, advances in the judicial system, more committed policing and education of boys and teenagers, the tabooing of crimes against women, all of it should continue, and probably on a more comprehensive scale than ever before. But a lot of these measures are already in place to some degree or another, and one wonders how effective they've been. He goes on to say, many women will testify that men routinely treat them as prey too. He's talking about men and prey earlier on in the piece from an evolutionary point of view. Sexual prey, violence prey, homicide prey. Maybe therefore it's no coincidence, for example, that women will often refer to a packed night club as a zoo or a jungle. Maybe it's why one regularly sees women holding hands as they navigate the heaving, drunken crowds of frustrated men in these venues. They are gazellas among the carnivores. Hashtag not all men. Hashtag too many men, me included. The male gaze, guilty as hell, he says. In bars, nightclubs, on television, at traffic lights, glimpsing female joggers on the run, idly assessing them without even thinking about it. Maybe this puts me on the same spectrum as the wretch who spotted the female jogger on the canal walkway in Tullamore last Wednesday and inflicted upon her the ultimate male vengeance. Maybe more of us blokes are on that spectrum than we realise. The murder of Ashling Murphy demands some rigorous introspection. It's clearly long overdue. And then he says, one doesn't want to indulge in performative hand-wringing either. Most blokes that I know are sound, for whatever it's worth. If we've been slow to wake up to the reality of toxic behaviour towards females, it's because we've been cocooned in our privilege. And he says, maybe because we've grown up at a time as well when women are vastly more conspicuous in the workplace than they were 2 generations ago, we perhaps blithely assume that the old sexism plague was a fading force in society, which on reflection is a bit like assuming when Jackie Robinson became the first black man to play in Major League Baseball in 1947, the old racism plague duly began receding too. And then last point, he talks about the level of grief in the country and how, you know, teacher, hurler, musician, giver of light and goodness, we couldn't but be touched by what she symbolised. But it's the manner of her death that seems to have reached a communal core, the nihilistic attack on one so young and vibrant. It seems almost pointless at this stage to be fulminating about it in a newspaper article. A million of them have been written before over the decades and centuries. Man shows the better angels of his nature on a daily basis too, but the battle with his darkness is biblical, pre-biblical in fact, probably prehistoric. And it's preordained seemingly to reach as far into the future as it does into the past, unless a new enlightenment somehow someday arrives to illuminate our ancient man cave for good. I'm curious, Sarah, what did you make? Because it was a male perspective, I think, and talking about men largely. It wasn't trying to get into the female psyche here.
He was accepting responsibility, first of all, on the part of all men, is what I felt, and recognising that there is a problem, as opposed to adding to the chorus of not all men. And that's point one. That's step one. I was a bit terrified to know that there was 4 billion men in the world. That threw me a little, but I did appreciate and recognise that he was accepting that even the smallest glance, at a female jogger and an assessment was beyond what is acceptable in the world, because it felt to me like he was saying that every small increment, adds to this bigger picture, and everybody has a part to play.
Mm. The only positive this morning is it's very hard to hide. Like, you come on, if you're listening to this show now, you'd hear what we're talking about. Most men, I venture, and would skip on a bit or wait for a bit later. But now when you read Tommy, so many, I'd also suggest that it's overwhelmingly male audience Tommy has. I know I go to him every week, but there's nowhere to hide. You go to read your favourite columnist this week and he's writing about it. So that's a positive, that no one's shirking, but there's literally nowhere to hide after what happened to Ashling Murphy, So,
yeah. Like I thought, Sarah, everybody's well-meaning, by the way, this week. So I don't mean this in a particularly strong sense, but she was just out for a run. Well, if she was out for like a bunch of drinks with her mates, would that make it more deserving? Of course it wouldn't. So I had a slight problem with that. She was just out for a run. Like, she can do what she bloody well likes, and, so that was there. So I thought when Tommy went beyond just the running and that point about, maybe it's why one regularly sees women holding hands as they navigate the heaving, drunken crowds of frustrated men in these venues. Hashtag not all men, hashtag too many men, me included. The male gaze, guilty as hell, bars, nightclubs, and so on. I mean, and so, he concludes that demands introspection for everyone reading. It's for all of us to go off and think about
when I was 22, when I was 22 or 23, Joe, I could get drunk and walk home on my own, no bother. I don't even have to remember it, It was just easy. I've done it countless times, So and so many women leave these areas because there's too many men in them, and they just want a bit of peace and quiet on their way home, That's the real horror here,
But I thought it was good he moved it to that area as well, Sarah, not just the out for a jog in the daytime.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's, I suppose, my biggest takeaway from the article was that he did put the I suppose emphasis firmly on men's behaviour and how men can impact the freedom that women feel in the world.
I don't want to segue straight into a sports piece. I think we've hopefully given this due time. We'll take a very short break and we'll come back and go through the rest of the sports stories with Sarah Donovan and Gavin Cummiskey. We're back in just one moment. Okay, you're welcome back to the paper review. We have Sarah Donovan, All-Ireland Camogie winner, with us. We have Gavin Cummiskey of the Irish Times as well. There's quite a few pieces to chat about. Dermot Crowe's a fascinating piece on management and how it's changed. We have a queue of people to take down Novak Djokovic. We have a fascinating interview with the former rugby player Kieran Lowe. We have Mick Foley on GA audiences. We have Shane Lowry and his decision to go to Saudi Arabia discussed. After the conversation we've just had, Gavin, let's talk about the least important thing I can think of. Bernard Jackman, I'm sure you're watching Munster on Friday night, and in Bernard Jackman's opinion, they were pretty much as rigid as ever, and he doesn't hold out much hope of them winning any silverware. He just looks at this team and can't get over how conservative they are, is the essence of Bernard Jackman's point. Yeah,
they look like they have done for a while, like a poorly coached team. A good while now, because you can see the players are there. Johan van Graan has been desperately unlucky in the sense that his star out half has been injured for most of his time, and I still think is the best second row in the world, R.G. Snyman. And then the other second row they signed from South Africa, Ewan Jenkins, have all been injured. So he's tried to play a South African game without the actual South Africans. It just can't be done. He's pretty much he's ignored the
game plan was perfect, except for the core element isn't on the pitch. But other than that, we're going to stick to it. He's
ignored a young Johan Hearn, the young Munster lock, who should have come through a year ago. I know there has been a couple of injuries and all that, and he's just not given him the game time he would have gotten every other province. And this, I thought Jackman's done a really good column, because Victor Matfield, Johan van Graan won't give anyone any insight into his thought process, and he hasn't got a rough ride at all then in Munster from the local in questions, and like the way he snapped at Murray Kinsella was a kind of a show of his true colours on TV there a few weeks ago. I thought Murray handled it quite well, and just went on to the next question.
I just want to intervene on his behalf there. I think a show of his true colours is harsh. I think his true colours I think he seems like a pretty decent fella. I think it was a show of defensiveness and feeling very under attack, as opposed to his true colours. That feels a bit harsh.
Which has happened every time he's been put under a little bit of pressure.
Sure.
So it is either one of two things. It's an inability to communicate, which means you're lacking a key pillar of being able to do a head coaching job at a big club, or it's just a refusal. So he was on the phone to Victor Matfield. He told him what he really thought, and Victor Matfield went on TV and said, explained what the thought process was about, I don't have my best players, and that's Van Graan's via this route it went out. And when the question was put to Van Graan, as Jackman notes, he goes, I'm not on Twitter. So again, when he's put under a tiny bit of pressure, he gives an ignorant response, right? He gives a response that's rude and that shuts it down. And he'll wait till he gets to Bath, and he won't get an easy ride. Wait till they get hold of him in Bath and the results don't turn. And he's given all that money and all those players. I'm sure he'll try and sign a Jenkins or an R.G. Snyman. Ironically, I thought the reason why Van Graan was leaving was because he couldn't keep Snyman and Delande for another 2 years. But then R.G. Snyman went and re-signed. So I don't know. The Jackman's column is very good and worth a read, because it gives you a little insight into what's really going on.
Yeah.
I thought the Stephen Larkham, the player, and Stephen Larkham, the coach, are two completely different entities. If Larkham was of the same standard of coaching as Andy Friend or Stuart Lancaster, we would have heard or seen it by now as an attack coach, and we just simply haven't. And so he's off. And Jackman's was a really telling line that kind of he says about Larkham. His contacts in Australia say he's a very conservative coach by nature, with a fondness for kicking.
I know. That jumped out as well. And when he arrived, there was such it's like, oh God, Stephen Larkham with his hands on Joey Carberry and this Munster attack, and wow, watch it blossom. Did they not do their due diligence? Or sorry, maybe
how did Larkham get here, Joe? What happened? Didn't Cheika just throw him to the wolves when he was trying to keep his own job in the Australian backroom?
There was a parting of the ways, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. Lancaster arrived here at a very low ebb. Andy Friend didn't come in here as this with this massive reputation. So it is, Ireland can become a place for rebuilding your reputation if you're a good coach. Johan van Graan's been there for a long time, and right now it goes down as a failed period of time. Unless, there's still a bit of time. There's still a really good squad there. They've got some of the best players that ever played for the province, and they've no medals in their pockets. So there is a huge motivation for them to get their act together. But what happens is Van Graan is clearly a good coach. He's a coach that can get a team to a certain level. And with Bath, he'll be given lots more funding to try and really prove his worth. And I'm sure he's a way better coach now than he was when he arrived, because he was very young, very inexperienced. He was coming off the back of coaching a desperate South African team, like one of the worst South African teams we've ever seen. He came from that back room into Munster. So, when you get put under pressure, and he is, from my brief meetings with him, seems like a very decent man, good young coach, but when he gets put under a tiny bit of pressure in the media, which is part of the job, like you don't see Stuart Lancaster or Leo Cullen. Leo Cullen got hammered at the start of his career. He again probably got it too soon, and just survived. And his communication was poor, and he fixed it, And he's now, I can give you multiple examples of, if you don't know how to talk to the media, you are missing one of the key elements of a head coach.
No, I accept that. Yeah, I accept that. Bernard Jackman. Sorry, go on. Sorry, excuse me. Finish your point, Gav.
Yeah, just saying that they're in a really bad place. They're winning via like a bit of excellence from a bit of, the Munster spirit is still there. Right? And the whole thing about Munster for the last few years was the spirit's never going to go away. You know what I mean? It's always going to be there, that aggression, that intent, that get you down into Tobin Park and do things to you that no team can cope with. But it needs expert coaching. It needs elite coaching. And it doesn't look like it has it at the moment.
Yeah. Some of the things Bernard Jackman says, he accepts Munster actually on the face of it are doing okay. They're going to have a home quarter final, only lost a few games in the URC. He said, we need to look beyond the results to get a better sense of where Munster are. In the last 4 matches, they've averaged 15 points scored, and they're far more comfortable without the ball than with it. And he said if the win, even in France on Friday, they've been doing well in the top 14 of late, won 3 in a row. But he said this was a second string selection. This is important context for any fan of judging things. This was a second string selection, crowd restrictions, less of a cauldron, and they had 6 COVID cases late in the week. It was no surprise the bookies had Munster 10 points favourites. And he mentions, the halfbacks, Murray, Casey, Carberry, Crowley, Healy. He compared them to what the likes of Jack Carty or Johnny Sexton have around them, where he says in those latter cases, the structure is there, set in stone, and they just have to pull the strings. Munster, apart from the crossfield kick to Keith Earls from the scrum in the first half, had no creativity off set piece on Friday. And he said, unless it's found, as in the improvement, player-led or coach-led, he says, unless it's found some Munster players, having spent a decade in red without any silver, where to show for it, will continue, which would be something those players will regret for a lifetime. So he's not holding out much hope. Could I, in the interest of keeping us moving forward, Sarah, get you to take us to the Dermot Crowe piece, which is very interesting, and you're in dressing rooms, so I like your perspective. This is going to be fascinating. We hear all this secondhand, I think, Gav and I, generally about the changing face of a dressing room, and Dermot Crowe has done just a great thing, I think, smart thing. He's talked to a bunch of managers. What's your sense of the young player today, and what are you hearing? I think his jumping off point is Mickey Hart's recent autobiography, where he notes that in the modern day dressing room on the way home from a defeat, as opposed to 20 years ago when there was awful heavy silence on the bus, this modern generation, there'll be a few laughs and a few giggles, and Mickey Hart sitting there wondering, does this mean as much? Are you as accountable? And that's his springboard to talk to various managers who, I would say, Sarah, have contrasting views on the current generation, which is always interesting.
Yeah, I read obviously Conor O'Donoghue, Colm Collins. So Colm Collins is the Clare manager. Conor O'Donoghue has been involved in Meath for the last 10 years. Both very different experiences of management and coaching. And what jumped out at me was Conor O'Donoghue's quote, where he said, I think you have to get the balance between support and challenge right with the current group of players. So Mickey Hart is obviously saying, how much does it really mean to players when they lose now? And that was his big concern, because back in the day, as you said, mass silence, nobody speaking, grave, upset. And now he can hear ripples of laughter in the bus. And the current day player, Conor O'Donoghue, is saying they don't necessarily take authority well. That's what I'm reading from it. He said they want a relationship that's mutual, that's mutually respectful. They're not looking for a dictatorship, and you have to try and balance supporting players and challenging them to get the best out of them.
And it was interesting. It was why he said the Mourinho style of management is on the way out.
The dictatorial type of management. And based on my experience, I would agree. There's players that need support and there's players that need challenge. And you've nearly said the wrong thing when you realise who needs the support and who needs the challenge in a current dressing room. I think that Colm Collins had a very interesting angle as well. In previous years, as a player, you would train 2 nights a week. You would go home and you would read in the paper on Sunday where you're going to be playing the match the following week. Now it's WhatsApp groups, it's gym conditioning, it's constant communication and interaction. There's a new thing that the girls are using with Dublin, Actimet. Every night you go home and you log your recovery, how long it takes to recover after a session. You grade the intensity of your sessions. You are constantly engaged and logged in. You never leave the dressing room or the pitch for the duration of the week, or certainly that's what it feels like to me, and that's what it feels like to Colm Collins. And he's saying we nearly need to give players a break because we're asking them to be switched on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I don't think Mickey Hart probably had that experience initially, and now in the last number of years has experienced that. And I suppose the gravity of what they're both saying is that are we losing that team element to games because we're focused on the individual so much and how they interact with the team and the group that we're making it too personal. Are we making the game too personal? And that goes back to Mickey Hart's point. How much does he really care? And that's something that I'm looking at based on Dermot Crowe's article.
You know that nightmare dressing room after you've underperformed and you're all sitting around and it's just like a funeral. But to hear a bit 20 minutes later, if you're on a bus, to hear a few lads having a bit of crack down the back, like, that's okay. That means they're not going to be depressed and wallow in themselves for a few days. That means they know that in 2 days' time they're going to get flogged and then pulled out on videos and everything. So if they're having a bit of, it shows that they're actually just a bit of hope, Yeah. If the lads are having if there's a bit of laughing and giggling on a bus, it's probably their only chance to do it as well. Because they're not going to be able to focus on it. So why not?
It's such a weird one, isn't it? Because I definitely see. I see Mickey Hart's. I see where he's coming from, and I know what Roy Keane would think at the front of that bus, and yet I hear you as well. Like,
a 24-year-old Roy Keane was probably having the crack on that bus, no matter what.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And that was the best version of him.
Colin Collins, interestingly, because there's a lot of talk of how it has changed so much. Colin Collins said something. I honestly feel youngsters today are no different to youngsters in the past. I don't think kids change. I think probably there's more temptations and stuff out there now. I suppose gambling, because of the online presence, that whole thing has become a bigger issue. And he mentions 3 players under his tutelage down the years who've had to go into counselling for gambling addiction, though he's not naive enough, he says, to assume it was just 3 who had their issues in that hand. But he said very resilient is his sense. The fellas that come into us, you get seriously resilient guys who come up against any adversity, and others where a little thing would put them off. But I don't think there is inherently anything different between kids now and 30 years ago, was Colin Collins' assessment. Dermot McGrath definitely agrees with that. He doesn't believe Dermot McGrath modern players are less resilient and more high maintenance, though the environment and society that they come from has changed. Because definitely others are saying, no, it's much more high maintenance. So kind of interesting. And actually, Dermot McGrath loves the Paul Mannion decision not to go back with Dublin. It looks like he's had a disagreement, but I think no, players are just planning. And he mentions a player of his who just wanted to go off travelling. I like hurling and I love travelling, was what the player said to him. And he kind of thought, well, good luck to you, that's no bad thing. I guess maybe 20, 30 years ago that wasn't happening as much. But
I see they lean into Eddie Jones, which is not a million miles away from the Joe Schmidt school as well. Like, people after 2 or 3 years under these guys say it's almost impossible. Like, look at the turnover of coaches under Eddie Jones in England.
Because it's too intense.
The Times actually did a massive piece there at the end of last year where they got in touch with as many of the assistant coaches and the back rooms of Eddie Jones. Yeah. He got to a World Cup final, he won a bunch of Grand Slams, he's done things that English rugby's never done before. But it's hell on earth for them. Some people just can't cope with it, like they've just walked out. It is definitely a dictatorship. And I imagine Pep Guardiola's reign is a complete dictatorship. But instead of feeding them with like what Mourinho would say, which would be like psychological stuff, he feeds them with detail and information, and he overwhelms them with that, and they can either cope with it or they can't. So like, there is still room for dictatorships in sport.
I loved Conor McKenna's interview with the lads and with Off the Ball just after they won the All-Ireland, and he's probably the antithesis to Mickey Hart, because he basically disliked everything about structure and the organisation involved in playing intercounty football, and he had such a lightness about his engagement with GA. You know, he doesn't even want to play league football on a Sunday. I think he was looking for a dispensation for the winter months, because he just didn't want to engage with club football on a Sunday in Tyrone. And
fair enough.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, his is the opposite to the Mickey Hart School of Football, and maybe, you know, him being involved this year and enjoying his football this year speaks volumes for the type of environment he was looking for as a player involved in sport. And it doesn't suit everybody, and it goes back to Conor O'Donoghue's point. Some players need support and some players need challenge. Yeah.
Something totally different, and I suspect this story will grow over the coming weeks as we head towards the Saudi Arabian Invitational. Shane Lowry's decision to play is addressed by Matt Cooper in the Sunday Business Post. Sarah, I know you brought that piece to our attention, and Shane McGrath as well in the Mail on Sunday. So, for instance, Shane McGrath's piece, very even, I would say, very fair. Lowry should not be scapegoated for golf's ills, but ignoring Saudi issue is not tenable. So he starts off by saying Shane Lowry's not a politician. He is a man trying to provide for his family, he says. The same argument could be made by the hundreds of young Irish people who move to Saudi Arabia and enjoy tax-free salaries as a way of providing foundations for their futures. They're making money, planning for the years ahead. He says, though, that contention is somewhat shakier, of course, where it's made by a millionaire sports star with an international profile who can presumably pick and choose his engagements with more freedom than the average 20-something. He said of Lowry, he's an easy target in the way Newcastle were when they were taken over by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. Hammering Lowry allows some to strike indignant public postures and to display their own virtuousness, an irritating feature of our world that transmits like a virus. Does say, though, the notion that Lowry, one of the most popular figures in Ireland, can eschew engagement with the wider issues around Saudi Arabia because he isn't a politician simply is not tenable. You don't need to stand for election to have a view on some of the grotesque features of the kingdom's society. And so that's Shane Lowry. Also adds, a career in politics isn't necessary to assess Saudi Arabia or process it or to formulate a view on it. This is where Shane Lowry's case was at its weakest. There was comfort in the old falsehood that sport and politics do not mix, but it was always rubbish. The position takes may be difficult to defend, but it's understandable. Let's not pretend, though, that only politicians can have a view, whatever, about taking a stand. And then Matt Cooper concludes that Shane Lowry may well come to wish he'd never signed this 3-year deal. He's been going to Saudi Arabia the last 2 years. Golfers tee up to give credibility to sports washing Saudi event. This arose this week, if you missed it, in that there was a conference call to promote the event, and Shane Lowry was one of those on the call. So many of golf's top stars are going to this, by the way, and appearance fees are very generous, we're hearing. And like Shane said, effectively, look, I'm not a politician, and also I'm a golfer and I'm trying to provide for my family, and so I'm happy to go and play there, and that's where I am on this. And I noted on the call, I was trying to get a full transcript of it. It was hard, though, but like Tyrrell Hatton was then asked to follow up, where are you on this? And he said, I have nothing to add. So I think Shane probably was trying to be honest, and in doing so has held himself up for more criticism on the basis of his argument for going, is my reading of the situation. Matt Cooper goes along similar lines to Shane McGrath. He said, he highlights the wider hypocrisies here. If Saudi Arabia wasn't such an important supplier of oil to the Western world, it's almost certain it would be treated as a pariah state. Now, of course, it is a supplier of oil, and it's probably not treated like a pariah state. So, your thoughts on the pieces, Sarah? I know you mentioned the Matt Cooper one first, or Gav, I hear you coming in. Jump in by all means.
Yeah,
sorry.
They could, but like if it's a golf tournament, you could be in Dublin. You're gonna go on your first class flight. You're gonna get the car will be whatever sponsored car will pick you up, bring you to the hotel back in car, golf course. So you're not actually going to see anything.
No.
Well, maybe they should all just bring their wives and see how they get on when they're off practicing and see how things go. Or ask about I'm sure that every golfer has a gay friend. Just ask about that. Maybe just, they don't have to go public about it, but just educate themselves a little bit, and they can come back with knowledge that they can write about in their memoirs. That'd be what I said. I thought Shane's. I don't see any reason to have a go at Shane Lowry here. He's again, he's not doing this on his own. You know, he's part of the group. But he did say, in one of his quotes, I left all that to my agent, but I'm pretty sure I had to go to get a release from both tours to go play. I think the quote of I left all that to my agent should be something after what Djokovic has gone through. I don't think anyone should be blaming their agent for it anymore. You make these decisions yourself, you know.
Yeah. I would think, based on what I can see in the States, certainly golfers are not of a high profile level in the States, and so, you know, Phil Mickelson's going, doesn't need the money. Dustin Johnson's gone for many years. All the best golfers in the world are going stateside, but they're such smaller fish in a huge pond that they're not attracting scrutiny and criticism, really. Whereas Shane Lowry is a very big fish in this rather small pond. So I think this is probably the most scrutiny and criticism Shane Lowry has ever faced, Sarah. What's your read on the coverage and on the story as a whole and on the decision to go and what he had to say about it, I suppose?
See, Shane Lowry has been such a positive proponent of women's sport. Back as far as 2014, we were involved in a coin toss with the Camogie Association back in 2014, and Shane Lowry, who had a link with the Dublin Camogie team at the time, tweeted out that we should be entitled to a rematch. And this spurred massive interest and resulted in us, in fact, getting our big day out in Semple Stadium and getting a rematch and not having to play an All-Ireland quarter-final as a coin toss. And going back that far in terms of his interest in women's sport and women's equality and women's rights and what he's done in the last year and 2 years, the 20 by 20 Can't See Can't Be campaign, and he's wearing the logo on his t-shirts and, speaking about his daughter and speaking about her future and what he wants to see for her as a woman in Ireland and as a woman in sport. And he constantly promotes equality and positivity. And unfortunately, the country that he's choosing to make a living in the next couple of weeks has no, emphasis on women's rights and treats women as second-class citizens. So it's an unfortunate way to make a living. Yeah. And that's how I would see it, because he's done so many positive things for women in sport in Ireland. And Leona Maguire, massive proponent and supporter of her, and her golf career, amongst, as I said, other women, including us lowly camogie players. So just really disappointed that one of the quotes that he has here is, "I'm happy to go there." Unnecessary, you know?
I don't think golfers are going to change society. I think that's been proven for a while now, that they're not going to be the beacons of hope in society when it comes to obvious decisions. When it comes to the choice of money or human rights, I think it's proven that they're going to go. And most sports people, to be honest, I think human rights are not going to win out, but if it doesn't impact their putting green in their garden or whatever.
Yeah. I would say Shane is, and I've been interviewing him for a long time, and he, one of the first people I remember interviewing when I worked in the show, and just so decent, and always remembered your name, and is a great fella. I would say that without hesitation. And yet I would also, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive, it doesn't mean Shane Lowry is suddenly a bad person, and I mean that sincerely, it doesn't. But
of course,
I'm disappointed, to be honest, and I think trying to be honest, and I think he was trying to be honest actually, as opposed to Tyrrell Hatton saying, "I've nothing to say about this." I think Shane was trying to say, "Look, I'm a golfer, not a politician, and I'm here to provide for my family. That's what I'm trying to do."
But he's not on the breadline, Joe.
I think that was what rankled, and I think that's almost going to prompt more criticism, because on the I'm a golfer, I'm not a politician, that suggests there's no in between. That suggests to assess what Saudi Arabia are doing here requires a professional level of politicking, and it doesn't. At what point are you just a citizen of the world? At what point do you say nothing or think nothing about anything? And at what point do you do something? And in the past, as you referenced, Sarah, he's done great things, and his support of Offaly GAA shows, I think, somebody very engaged with his community. And that's why it's a touch surprising here in this instance, because it's not a complicated situation. It's just not. It's a very straightforward one. And this isn't Mercedes hosting a tournament in Saudi Arabia. This is the very, this is the royal family. This is Saudi Arabia, guilty, I would say, of all the things that they've been accused of across most spheres. So it's a direct engagement with them. That doesn't require you to be a politician. And just saying I'm a golfer and I think about nothing else, that doesn't really wash. And then the second point, I'm just trying to provide for my family. Look, it comes across as tone deaf, because I accept golfers, it can all end in the morning. You can get the yips. Unforeseen things can happen. Now, it's not going to happen to Shane Lowry, but to date he's earned 20 million in prize money and sponsorship besides, and will probably be still playing golf in 20 years. And so he's richer than 99.8% of the planet. And so providing for my family, it doesn't wash. In the same way, I don't think I would hold it against someone who was toiling away on 30 grand a week for 10 years and then got offered 2 million to go to Saudi Arabia for a few years' work. That's transformational money. This isn't transformational money for Shane. This is a nice bump up to a very nice bank account already, unfortunately. That's all it is. It's not transformational. It's not the difference between providing or not providing. That same week he could compete for $1 million first place prize money in Pebble Beach. He has that option, And so when it's not even a difficult one, when it's not even like a difficult ulterior, it's doubly hard to kind of say it's okay. Now, I still like Shane Lowry. I still admire Shane Lowry in so many ways, but I don't think going to Saudi Arabia is admirable.
Joe, can I just say, all the golfers have to do is watch, said at the start beforehand, the Amazon Prime Jamal Khashoggi documentary. Like, if that doesn't make you stop holds and have a look at your decisions in life, and maybe just being devil's advocate and trying to be fair to him, maybe he looked at this and goes, I'm going to get hammered for a week for this, but if I pull out and become the guy who stood up to Saudi Arabia, the professional sportsman, does that follow me around forever? You know, maybe. I'm just saying, be fair to the man, because we know he's a decent human being. Like everyone in on this conversation knows that. So maybe that's it there. You know, maybe he was just like thinking of a long game, going, I'll just get the head down, do this with everyone else, and because like it's proven that they're a murderous state, yet all the major governments in the world are still do business with them. So you know, why should I have to be the person who every time Shane Lowry gets mentioned for the rest of his career, is he the guy who stood up to Saudi Arabia? Does he want that in his life? Maybe not, you know. So just to be fair, but
I think there's lots of mitigating circumstances. Absolutely. Like, he is just playing a golf tournament. It's not a full-on endorsement. It's an implicit, you know, it's part of this sports washing mission. It's an endorsement in that sense, but it's not an explicit one. And I don't think Shane Lowry espouses any of the values that we're criticising of Saudi Arabia. And we're all hypocrites here, by the way. All three of us have bought clothes made in sweatshops and probably continue to do so and are not thinking about that enough. You know, to take one example, top of the head, that was mentioned on Golf Weekly this week, we're all hypocrites, but I suppose Peter Lowry was on Golf Weekly this week. He said with great success comes a certain degree of responsibility, and you have options, I suppose, and that's why it's arisen. I don't know, it's a tough one. I don't think this defines Shane Lowry. I don't think he loses the admiration, Sarah, of the vast majority of the country either, in wider terms.
No, I know he doesn't. But Saudi Arabia is such a ridiculous place to fall on your sword.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. That's the thing. That is the thing. Yeah.
I respect that he's being honest, and we value his honesty. And, you know, we've enjoyed so many good interviews with Shane Lowry over the past 10 years. So many good ones. So his honesty is to his detriment in this case.
I would, by the way, give honourable mention for probably one of the least appreciated sports people on this island, which Rory McIlroy, who we've never quite, I don't think, taken to our hearts for some reason. I don't know, is it maybe we see him as Northern Irish and that's it? I don't know if we feel he's more Planet Nike and citizen of the world than ours, in the same way like Lowry, who'll be having a pint at the local and going to Croke Park is, or Harrington, who's such a Dublin everyman. But Rory McIlroy, when the Saudis first started getting involved in golf, he came out strongly, and he didn't just say, I'm not interested. He said, I don't like where the money's coming from. And he said that in explicit terms. Now, it's a brave thing to take on the Saudis. You know, it's like in any number of ways. Would you trust the Saudis not to hack into your computer and find some way to ridicule you and do all sorts? You know what I mean? Like,
they hacked into Jeff Bezos' computer? They're probably hacked into us already. They're probably reading our tweets right now.
Correct.
You know?
So if they're going at Bezos, they could go at McIlroy if they wanted to. But he came out and he said, I don't like where the money's coming from. And he's been one of the real leaders on that front. And he's not going to Saudi Arabia. And I guarantee you he was offered a lot of money. And he's not going. And he's one of the very, very few golfers taking that stance, because the other point to make here, Shane Lowry amongst his contemporaries is not doing anything out of the ordinary. He is not doing anything out of the ordinary, and that is the environment in which he's making his living. So in that sense, McIlroy's done an incredible thing. And I saw Andy Murray during the week, who, by the way, is coming to the end and like will be thinking, God, my big paydays are behind me increasingly. He was offered a 7-figure sum to play one match in Saudi Arabia and said no. You know, these people really should be celebrated as well.
Yeah. Andy Murray's going to be a massive commentator for the rest of his life, though, in sport, if he wants it, you know.
Yeah.
Because he's quite moralistic and where he comes from and his stances on things and going after Egypt. So, yeah. But McIlroy's the hero.
I think you're referring to Nigel Farage, are you?
Oh, that was a beauty.
I didn't want to say his name.
That was a straight sets, game set and match tweet, wasn't it? Oh, my God. Yeah. So, look, it's tricky. I think Shane will find the criticism very difficult, and that will be tough for him because he's not used to it because he's so beloved.
Exactly. And that's probably why it's harder to take. I hold him in very high esteem, having gotten to play in Semple Stadium because of the little fight he took on our behalf. And he's just He's just shining a little less brightly for me today.
Okay. To someone who's shining brightly for everyone, Novak Djokovic. There's a thing on the show when we're having our production meetings. There are certain stories where I'll say to the team or whatever, if it's been covered a lot and it's becoming a touch overdone or boring, I'll say, well, if we're doing that, we need a high threshold guest. Like, we've got to do something really good here for this piece to work. Novak Djokovic, for me and the Sunday papers today, needed really high threshold stuff. I didn't care anymore. I'm so over it. So I read all the pieces as a professional courtesy. But if I was at home having a cup of tea and with the feet up, I would have glanced at a Novak headline and just turned the page. So that's where I was on Novak, I have to say. Ollie Holt goes to town on him in the Mail on Sunday. There's Stuart Fraser in the Sunday Times. Eamon Sweeney gives him a good kicking as well on the back page of the Sunday Independent. So I don't know, Sarah, where were you in the Djokovic story and how did you find any of the pieces?
Ironically, for some reason, I was awake at 6 o'clock this morning, and obviously the live feed was on, and 30,000 people were tuned in to the.
You're kidding! 30,000.
30,000 people tuned in to the decision. Yes, yeah. I don't know why I was wide awake, but I was, and I was very relieved that I suppose sense prevailed. There's lots of people who have suffered immeasurably in Australia and even here in Ireland, not being able to be in contact with their family over the last 2 years. And, you know, he was making a mockery of the rules, and no more so than all of the inconsistencies and the discrepancies in terms of his positive COVID case or otherwise, or when it was filed. And as Gavin alluded to, his agent dealing with things that were left to be dealt with and weren't dealt with correctly. And ultimately, he was deported, and I couldn't see any reason why he should be left playing the tournament because he didn't follow the rules.
100%, Sarah. But Scott Morrison's spin doctor is having a lovely brunch this morning, and because he's absolutely nailed it. What they did, they politicised the whole thing. They could have just stopped them, you know. They could have just checked, were you in Spain or did you lie on this document, and just not even let him get on the plane from Dubai. It could have easily been done, but they let it happen because they wanted to politicise it because there's an election coming up. So that's why it feels a bit. Like, you can understand why people, like even Nadal, who was so obviously, he was there going, he's known about this for months, but even he felt real sympathy for him about the second or third time he spoke about it, because he was being made an example of. And it was like, us Aussies will do it because they've always had strict border control anyway. There's like a TV show about it. And he was like, us Aussies have shown that we put this lad in a poor detention hotel just like everyone else. They handled it so it's reflected really badly on Australian politics, on governance and communication. Yeah. And they've come out of it looking like we've hoodwinked the world, and you know, we've made him an example. I say the relations between Serbia and Australia, and Serbs and people from the Balkans living in Australia, that's going to resonate for a while because they know what's happened, they know it's politicised. But having said all of that, name me no other person in the world could lie or get their agent to fill out a form to get into a country during COVID and get away with it, which he almost did. Like, for that alone, for the lie and for the pictures with the kids, which he said he didn't know he had COVID, he hadn't got the result back, and then doing the interview with Lequip, like that there just shows you just how, like, his attitude is so cavalier, and it's as if he's kind of pitching for politics himself, Djokovic. So he probably got a bit of a piece of his own medicine. Because why else, if he's not anti-vax, he keeps playing to the crowds all the time with this, how he keeps virtue signaling over. And it was so funny, like when the hearing was on last night, there was you just go back to him in the nightclub, him and all the other tennis players with their tops off dancing in the COVID nightclub when that tournament he organised at the start of, when they were basically implying that COVID wasn't serious, and they had that tennis tournament where everybody got sick. So that kept popping up on social media, which I thought was funny. It's totally, even he said it himself in his statement, it's gone past tennis, it's overshadowed the Australian Open. It's made a mockery of a lot of how they do their business down there. Yeah. And I don't think anyone comes out. I hope people will see through your man Morrison.
I really hope so. I found the politicking just so blunt and so obviously contrived. It was pathetic, you know. I mean, some of these clearly poll-tested lines like, rich people can't expect to break the rules. I mean, like, some of the stuff was just so transparent. And that gave me a certain sympathy for Djokovic. But then, like, Eamon Sweeney does address Still, some weird stuff's gone in here, you know. So, like, Sweeney goes to town on him. Well, there are two things we know about Djokovic. One is that he's a great tennis player. The other is that he's a fool. So that's his opening line. So you kind of, you know, you have a sense where this is going. And if you're Novak Djokovic, stop reading now. But he does make some, I think, interesting points. Believing everything is above board about Djokovic's participation, and this is where I kind of lose a bit of sympathy for Djokovic and the scapegoat that he so clearly was, because there was guilt on both sides. Believing everything is above board about Djokovic's participation requires us to accept that the reigning Australian Open champion was apparently prepared to miss the event until December 16th, when he caught the dose of COVID, which enabled him to get the exemption. We also need to ignore the revelation in Der Spiegel that the code for the player's purported COVID test scanned as negative before changing to positive shortly after they'd inspected it, and their discovery of a timestamp anomaly which suggested the test was carried out 10 days later than stated. There's also the fact that after apparently testing positive, Djokovic attended that public ceremony that you mentioned, Gav, and the L'Equipe magazine, no mask for either. And then there's the line on the form. Weirdly, in the, you know, there's Chekhov's gun here and you feel like everything is suspicious. I actually do think the travel to Spain thing was just a mistake, because why wouldn't you just say, yeah, no, we travelled to Spain? You know, I think that one is just this weird extra layer of complication that added to the cloud over the whole thing. But the business around the COVID test and the different dates and the Der Spiegel story and the fact that, you know, he seems to have Serbia at his beck and call, Novak Djokovic. What went on there in December, I don't know. And look, once Sarah, it became apparent he lied, I think the sports minister was, or sorry, the immigration minister, Alex Hawke, who's a charming fella all in its own right if you want to look into his politics. But I think it was obvious that he was going to take this open goal and let the Australian people know that nobody's above the rules, chest out.
Well, just to it was, sorry for interrupting you, Sarah, but his legal team argued strenuously that he's not an anti-vaxxer, which I thought was quite a funny 45 minutes of talking.
Well, 97 of the top 100 tennis players in the world are COVID facts.
I couldn't believe that's a great rate, isn't it?
Yeah. And I wouldn't want to be in that small minority, to be honest, because, look, I think Djokovic went into this with his eyes wide open, and I genuinely have no sympathy for him. I can't. Politicking aside, I just think with everything that everyone has lost over the last 2 years and the immense and freedom that everyone has lost, that story was almost comedic. You know, you're the world number one, you want to play in a flimsy tennis tournament in Australia. No one cares, you know, and that's where I sit with it on the grander scheme of things. Maybe after this week, I'm just a little more raw about the things that matter less. But that's where I feel today, you know, and even though I was up this morning at 6 watching the ruling on...
With your sweatband on and your racket and your Djokovic t-shirt, was it?
Yeah, it was great fun. I've enjoyed every article I've read.
Oh, such a circus. It was amazing how it all felt so important for a few days, and then in light of this week, it just became like dropped off the news agenda here totally, didn't it? We don't have time, by the way, to discuss this. I think it would be such an interesting chat. Let's come back to it. But in short, Sarah, Mick Foley, you're a GAA lover, was going through like RTE's most watched shows and I suppose the most watched TV events of 2021, and it's all sport. And Mick is a gog, first of all, by the way, that like Home and Away is getting 5 million downloads on the RTE player, despite appearing twice a day on RTE 1 and RTE 2. And this is a population that has spent the last couple of years in lockdown at home. He says, what fresh madness is this? So Home and Away is still going strong in the RTE player, which is good. But
my dad watches it every day. At 1:30.
Yeah. Oh, dear. And does he get Neighbours before, or is he showing some restraint?
No, solid fan.
Are any of the old characters still there and all that, or from the 90s?
He's a solid fan of Home and Away, doesn't deviate, won't go near Neighbours.
Right.
No, wouldn't waste his time, but solid Home and Away fan.
Good man. Well, Mick just makes the point that the club championship in audience figures really hasn't captured the imagination, club action. Like he says, you know, the word from RTE is basically, if you put me and Gav Cummiskey out there playing, you'd still get 100,000 views, you know. So that's kind of like your baseline, and it's not going massively above that. Maybe they'll peak at 200,000 over the next while, but it's nothing to write home about. And I think he makes a very good point about the club, and See, I'm torn in this because you want to look after the 90% of participants, but in terms of like the popularity of the game, he just says, and I think it's a really shrewd observation, Sarah, that the club championship, unlike county, where like even if you're a neutral watching, there's kind of stable storylines going on. He says the club championship has none of that stability. The diversity, the randomness of winners, the contenders from year to year is any club competition's greatest strength as a concept, but it's also its greatest weakness as a viable television product. You just get these random teams and unknown players each year and you can't really build a story. And he says the inter-county scene offers familiar names, characters. It's like a long-running soap opera, like Home and Away, if you will. Each club championship is a standalone mini-series with little links from one season to the next. Again, works fine for everybody for the time being, for RTE, not a massive spend, public broadcasting service. The only serious possibility, he says, though, for the club game outgrowing itself might be a few super clubs emerge and they play each other routinely and we get that sort of storyline. So he says his argument is that because of that, they were never built for the big time, the club championship. This winter they found their niche. The games will never hold a huge audience, is his argument. Would you agree or disagree with that? Is there more scope, do you think, for the club championship to capture the imagination, or do you see where Mick's coming from?
I'm really trying. I've been to Parnell Park at least 5 times in the last 6 weeks to engage with the club championships that have been ongoing. Now, I do live 5 minutes from Parnell Park, so it's not a great ask, but charging me €18 to see 2 club teams go at each other in a very, I suppose, banal fashion means that even I'm struggling when Kilmacud are on the TV to engage with it. And it's because it's just not shiny enough for me. I'm going to Old Trafford next Saturday because I'm missing the fireworks of Croke Park and I need some spectacular sport. Yeah. And that's my issue, I suppose, with
the club. Wrong place.
I know. Well, West Ham could end up in the Champions League.
But you get razzmatazz, you get that sense of event, you get a bit of polish, you get all of that stuff. Yeah.
And look, if we narrow, if we put the GA inter-county season into such a narrow window, as is proposed, and it's all going to be done and dusted by July, August, then the Premiership is going to be more and more attractive to people. I'm actually going to Watford and Brighton in February, just as an aside, but that's all because there isn't really anything happening in the inter-county scene until March or April, and I suppose that's where I am. I want to be entertained.
We're so out of time. I think we should have that conversation again, because I tend to agree with you, actually, and anecdotally is what I sense out there as well. But we are way out of time. Thank you both. That was a paper discussion for the first half, unlike many others. So I appreciate you having those difficult conversations. Sarah Donovan, All-Ireland winner, and Gavin Cummiskey, the Irish Times. Thanks to you both. Enjoy the day.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.